on the stream too. So welcome everybody to our August witty equity community session. We do this every month and really as a way to support our members. Witty's been around since '89. So, we're just kind of starting to use email then. And as things evolved, here we are 35 almost years later, and we're able to kind of have people from all around the world join in on vacations. They can chime right in. So it's pretty exciting. And yeah, we're thrilled to have Catherine Montgomery as our guest. Dr. Rick, you'll be interviewing, and I'm going to push it over to the two of you and take it away.
Well, thank you. Let me just explain how Catherine and I met. It was actually the last event, and we had the opportunity of chatting. And I thought, wow, this sounds like a fascinating story. And so we had a brief conversation, and she told me more about her experience. And I thought, I want to learn more about it. So the purpose of this really is to spotlight different people sharing their inequity stories. And we'd like to do it in about 15 minutes or so. Whether we break out to small groups or not, or whether we continue this conversation will depend upon how people feel of how we want to use our time. So Catherine, maybe you could begin by, sharing your story about the experience that you had in the workforce.
Sure. I wish it were a better story. I think the outcome is good, but we'll start off in that my background's in working at public relations agencies across the country. I've worked at several of the larger agencies, and I knew right out of undergrad that it was my passion to work at an agency. But I started to realize that I wanted to focus my communications efforts on helping other people. And that's why I moved to Boston to work at a startup agency. And we were doing great work and really helping communities. And it wasn't until last year that an employee at that agency was actually being racist toward me. And it was so, strange because, I moved to Boston from DC to work at an agency that focused on progressive causes and trying to make the world a better place. But actually in the environment, someone was being racist. So I was really surprised by that. We didn't have HR in the typical role. So we hired an HR consultant in March of last year. And I didn't hear back until August of last year that they didn't find any signs of racism. And so, of course, after waiting 5 months to get that response, I was devastated. And they actually didn't speak to anyone on my team about what had happened or consult anyone else. And so not really sure how they came to that conclusion. But the next month in September, that same person received a raise and promotion. And to me, that was just like, okay, well, you really don't want me here. Obviously, you could just tell me that. And I was just going to leave. If I had to move back to Alabama and live with my parents, I would have done that. It would have been horrible, I'm sure, but it would have been better than being in that situation. But fortunately, I had a mentor who said, they've done wrong. They know they've done wrong. And you have evidence of the person being racist towards you. So you should ask for a buyout. And it was a lot of strength that it took for me to call the president of the agency and say, I'm going to go to the EEOC, I'm going to go to the media, I'm going to tell them what's happening, or you can give me a buyout. And I had already spoken with an employment attorney who had advised me on, what to ask for and things like that. And so I told him what I wanted. And the call was literally 2 minutes long. And he said, okay, you can speak to my lawyers from now on. And I spoke to his lawyers. I got what I wanted. And then I said, oh, wait, there's taxes. And so I added more to the buyout. And I ended up, getting what I asked for and more. And that's great, but I hate that I had to go through that experience at a company that I really believed in to actually get there. And so I left the agency at the end of September of last year and was really looking for what my next step was. And fortunately, I was in a place of privilege at the time because I had the buyout and I didn't have to just immediately go into another job that maybe I wasn't excited about. But I was actually on a Slack channel called Ladies Get Paid. There's about 50,000 women in the Slack channel, and anyone can join. And I just happened to be scrolling through the different channels, and a recruiter had posted that a venture capital firm was looking to expand to the US and that they only invest in PR agencies. And I never heard of that because you don't need VC funding to start a service-based company. So that was really strange. But I was like, hey, I'm just sitting here. I might as well try it. It might be sketchy, but we'll see. And I met with the recruiter the following day, and we really hit it off. It was instant best friends. And literally the next day, I met with one of the investors who lives in Connecticut for MXP Ventures. And we had worked with some of the same people at previous agencies. We didn't know each other directly, but that kind of helped. And I had no business plan. I had no idea what I was doing or talking about, but what I had was my passion for helping other people and my passion for social impact, as well as my passion for communications. And I believe that that just came through to them. And they could really see, well, he at the time could really see that I would do what it took to make a successful agency while being able to help other people. And then a couple of days later, I met with the other investor who lives in Germany, and he asked more hard-hitting questions like, how are you going to make money? And I had no answers because I literally just found out that this was an opportunity. But I eventually wrote a business plan, met with the investors in person, figured out what my goals and priorities would be, and they saw something in me and they started working with me, and I officially launched in January of this year. And, you know, I have to keep myself in the moment sometimes to realize like what I've been able to accomplish. I was so proud of myself, which is hard for me to even say that, but so proud of myself for standing up for me and what I deserved when it came to the other agency and the president of that agency. Because normally I would have never done anything like that, but it got me to where I am. And it was the worst year of my life last year, not only because of that job, but other reasons too. And truly my life has been transformed into something that I would have never imagined now.
That's amazing. You know, there's two ways we can go with this conversation, and it depends upon how you feel about it. But also, I'm going to open up to other people to ask questions. I'm not going to, ask all the questions. One is the problem of the past and the adversity of that. But the adversity allowed you to actually evolve into something that would have never have happened had that misadventure had not have happened. While it's interesting to go into the inequities and the details of it, I'm sure if people want to learn more about it and you want to share it, they could perhaps connect with you offline. What I'm drawn to is, where's this going to next? I mean, one of the misfortunes I've experienced that is the fortune of evolving to something else. So my curiosity is naturally to say, okay, what are you doing? Where are you going? How are you going to be better together and prevent some of those, the mishap that happened before? So I want to allow you to shape the agenda a little bit, and then, we can open it up to questions. So what's your inclination?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about where we are now. So it's been, about 7 months since Better Together launched. And I will say that it has been a roller coaster. There's been some really good, highs and some like low lows where I was like, I never thought anything like this would happen, but running a business is very difficult, but it can be very rewarding as well. I actually had a client call today. We're helping promote 2 pieces on reparations that are coming out soon. And she was like, you all work all the time. And I said, well, we have to remember that we're helping other people when we do it. And she was like, okay, we'll keep that in mind. But yeah, it's a lot of hard work, never ending. And I'll say that how I've learned from previous positions where leadership has not been the best is thinking of what I can learn from that. And so every single day I think about my employees, and, not only do I want them to know that they're helping other people, but I actually want them to want to come to work every day. Like, that's we're remote, but I actually want them to get on Slack and to actually communicate with each other and enjoy what they're doing. So really thinking about it and being open to their feedback on how can we be better? How can we be more inclusive? And I don't know, just not make it a place where I'm telling them or dictating everything that's happening, but that we're a team and that we're growing together. And it's really truly an opportunity for them to kind of pave their way, pave their path for their careers, because really it's limitless on the impact that we can have and the work that we can do. And so I encourage them all the time to just, think big, think beyond what you think is possible, but what we can actually do, not only at Better Together, but in helping the world as well. I do have on my board right over here, just, what good can come from the bad. And so I have to remind myself every day of that.
Actually, one thing that might help to contextualize it a little bit, and then I'll open up to anybody who would like to ask some questions, is maybe you could share a little bit of the vision and mission of Better Together, so that we're a little bit more grounded in what it is. What are you moving to, so to speak? So maybe you could elaborate on that, and then I'll open it up, and David can open up to anybody who would like to put their hands up and ask questions.
Right. So we use communications to achieve equity at Better Together. So everything comes from a thought of, if we're going to work with this organization, this company, it can be for-profit or non-for-profit, how are we going to make the world a better place? And so that's pretty easy to do with nonprofits, because from the beginning, they're trying to help other people. When it comes to for-profit, such as, really large companies, Fortune 5, Fortune 10, 50 companies, they're really focused on their bottom line. And so we have the proverbial checklist of, is this company really authentically committed to helping communities? And this really came out of, in 2020, we all know George Floyd was murdered, and all companies, large companies, gave millions of dollars to communities. But last year, the Washington Post put out an article saying, we don't know where that money went. Most of it didn't go to Black communities. It was just a way for those companies to check a checkbox and say, okay, we're done with that. And so that's what I don't want to get into. I don't want to get persuaded by the dollar signs that, a large company might have, and then find ourselves, not really promoting social impact efforts. And so before we, when we're presenting a proposal to a large company, like, we tell them honestly, hey, nobody likes you, if that's the case. Like, it's not always the case, but nobody likes you. This is what you actually need to do to make people believe that you're being genuine when it comes to DEI efforts externally. And, they'll say, wow, we've never had anyone say anything like this to us, because really most people just want their money, and we're not here for that. We're here to really be authentic in what we're doing and to help other people.
I'm going to, David, could you let people put up their hands? Maybe we could go back to a gallery format. I have lots, I'm sure I could ask lots of questions, but I don't want to, I just want to set the stage to allow other people. But the other side of it as well is getting a sense from other people about, how can they help you, or vice versa. So, I mean, I think this is such an important area if you're focusing on equity or DEI, how to make it more authentic. So I'm quite happy to continue asking the questions, but I'm sure there's somebody here who would like to put their hand up and ask a question.
I would like to put my hand up. Winifred, this is
Go
Winifred.
ahead.
Go for it, Winifred.
Great conversation. And just sorry for all you went through to get to this place, but thankful that it has served a good purpose. I would like you to break it down, because when you say you use communication to achieve equity or to achieve social impact, that vision is very broad. What is your mission statement? What are the values that drive your organization? What are your goals? So break it down to a place that that resonates with us, that makes it a bit more tangible. I think it's a bit too big for me to wrap my head around. So can you dive a bit deeper? Thank you.
Sure, of course. So many public relations communications agencies, they are pretty general in the work they do. So they might build an AI department because it's cool to do, or a DEI department to focus on those types of clients. But all of our clients, they can be in any kind of industry, but whatever efforts they're doing, whatever communications efforts they're doing need to be focused around social impact. So for example, one of our clients is Touch for Life, and the founder has had metastatic breast cancer twice. And so she founded this organization to bring about breast health equity to women of color. And so through all of our efforts, we strive to, whether it's through a website, through events, through social, through media outreach, we try to advance that information. And honestly, I've learned so much, like that, women of color have different screening guidelines when it comes to when to have mammograms than other women. And so it's just educating women on what they need to ask their doctor, because a lot of times doctors won't be straightforward with them on what they need, as well as genetic testing and things like that. So it's her efforts, her nonprofit is trying to better educate women of color on breast health. And so what we're doing is helping her communicate that to the world. Does that help, Winifred?
Yes, it helps. So you are kind of a marketing and communications outfit. That's what you are.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, excellent. That's what I needed to know what industry to place you in. Okay, thank you so much for
You're
that.
welcome.
And I have a question, if nobody else does. So, we've seen the shift in DEI, right? I mean, we saw it at Witty from 89 when we started. I think companies authentically wanted anybody. Tech was going to be the big equalizer, right? I think it wasn't until in tech, the end of the 90s, when they started bringing in these heads of diversity, kind of threw women in that. They became more of these, box checking, window dressing exercises, really driven by fear and risk management, in my opinion. Right. And I think there's just so much value to add to the bottom line if they can create cultures to allow everybody to just be their best and work. And, with a lot of the recent things we saw, whether it was Microsoft kind of cutting a lot of the programs they had to invest in AI, that was probably a good thing because very dysfunctional at Microsoft, in my opinion, or from my views. A lot of these other companies, right? So with this new, right? I mean, are you seeing this, Catherine? Right?
Yeah.
It's like, they're getting. I think there's so much value to add to the bottom line if they do things right, and ways to attract and retain the best people. But how do we shift it, and what are you seeing? Yeah, or anything to add to that?
Yeah, especially after 2020, every company, it was another check box, it's like, okay, we got to hire this diversity person. We don't know what skills they need. Oh, but this person's a woman or a person of color, they'll be fine. Like they'll know what to do. And that's just not how it works. And so now you have so many companies getting rid of those roles, thinking they didn't help any. And that's because they were set up for failure from the start. And now the question is where do we go next? Do we just give up on DEI? I mean, now it's a term that most people even try to stay away from because, what does it even mean? So yeah, that's what I'm seeing, companies trying to figure out what they do next and if they keep DEI around and what that looks like. But I say, I don't know, the role is not working. I don't see the chief diversity officer role being a thing that continues as it is. And I don't know that employees have respect for the role either. I was actually at this last agency at one point, chief experience and success officer, and someone in a poll or some kind of survey put, oh, you put the one woman of color who's a leader in this role that nobody cares about. And I mean, that's my feelings, but
no, I mean,
that's
it's
what
gotten
people
so right. It's gotten
Yes.
so phony. They're like alienating everybody.
yeah.
When right, I mean, our vision of Witty is let's focus on revenue and attracting and retaining the best people. Do it in a way so you're naturally going to be diverse if you work with us, because we're going to show you why this stuff adds to the bottom line. I just think having it as a separate department is just proved to be a fail. Yeah, and I think we're going to talk after Catherine for sure. because I want to talk about how we can help these companies evolve and learn, because I think there's just so much upside. And the shareholders, right? They're the ones who are paying the price for a lot of this mismanagement. But it took a pandemic, I think, right, to shake things up. So
Yeah, and Rick, I see you put in, oh, it's a book, but Amazon is actually trying to focus on inclusive technology and how do you from the start before tech is made. So before AI was developed, which it's been around forever, but there should just be people at the table with whoever's creating the technology, realizing, okay, there's not just one person, one type of person who's going to use this, but it has to be everybody in the world, and it has to be adaptable to everyone. So that's very vital. But you can talk about the book you put in the link, in the chat.
Pamela Newkirk is, it's a brilliant book, and you can actually go on, look at some podcast interviews. I couldn't find them, I just put that link in there. But she basically sort of lampoons the whole notion of DEI and saying it's a multi-billion-dollar endeavor which has not had impact. And so, it really is a tall order for corporations to do this well. And how can you, avoid just doing window dressing to the issue rather than doing something more substantive? And I think the challenge actually is how to communicate that in such a way that it actually has more of an impact. I don't know if you're familiar with the word wicked problem, but wicked problem is a form of a complex problem. And there is no easy solutions to it. So the question then is, well, how can you actually make some of these things work? You look at ESG as an example, or even the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of people talk the talk, but there's a huge discrepancy between the rhetoric and the action. And how can you, close the gap, the hypocrisy between the rhetoric or the PR and what's actually happening? That's not easy. And if anybody has any examples of where they feel like they've actually made some inroads into this, it would be great to hear from people, or even stories yourself, Catherine, if you've heard of where people are actually moving the needle, where people feel like it is beginning to work.
Yeah, I don't know specific stories, but I know that people are trying and they feel like it's little by little.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but I know that people haven't given up, which is great.
And I think it's really about transforming. Sorry, Rick.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
I just think it's about transforming the whole thing. You can't change what's so wrong now. And I think things like the ERGs, right? A lot of the employee resource groups, they have women, the different diversity groups that they pay less, having to do all this extra work where they normally don't get paid. Some companies are starting to pay them now. If they look at things holistically and incorporate that into, just things you're doing for the company, Catherine, to show what they're doing, right? And the recruitment processes and sales leads. I think that's where just there's opportunity to look at things more holistically around a lot of these conversations.
There's quite a few people who are not on camera, which is fine. Oh, hi, Jima. Do you feel like chiming in if you put your camera on?
Yeah, if I may, thank you. Good to be here, and thank you, David Layton, for sharing the link. It's an important subject, and where we are now, we cannot separate it from the larger environment, the larger geopolitical concerns going on in the world. And as a writer, as a formerly active journalist, I'm not that active anymore these days. I'm very attentive to words and language, and sometimes just a subtle shift in wording and a way of getting people to enter the conversation that's different could make a huge difference. And so I'm wondering if there is value in emphasizing the importance of diversity of thought. And if you want to have diversity of thought, you need people from diverse backgrounds, different walks of life, different lived experiences that have to do with all kinds of demographic diversity, right? Mm-hmm. Diversity of thought and human potential. Don't we want more diversity of thought, and don't we want to unlock more human potential, which happens to be important in these ways, versus getting locked into the DEI acronym and then having to play to existing definitions that are restrictive that could deal with optics. Meanwhile, I'm using DEI in a completely different meaning, different perception, And so when it's a word that has been approved and then there are multiple definitions of it, we end up thinking we're talking about the same thing, or we're actually talking about very varied experiences. But if it's diversity of thought, then by definition, we're bringing different thinking, and it's because of different backgrounds. I don't know if that helps or makes sense. I'm just wondering what the potential of that is, especially also as somebody who's worked a lot in the human potential movement. Big fan of Oprah Winfrey, Lisa Nichols, Reverend Michael Beckwith, Jack Canfield, Tony Robbins. And there's naturally a lot of diversity in those settings because the emphasis is human potential, diversity of thought, and people want to know about your lived experience. People want to know why you're different and what you bring that's different. And I don't find that necessarily be true in all other industries. It really depends also on the industry. So quite a lot of thoughts there. And I'd love to just hear reflections and see if this resonates or if this is relevant at all as even an inquiry to have.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Rick, you even put in the chat before we started your definition of equity. And so it does seem like everyone has different definitions of things.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like the idea of diversity of thought. It makes me wonder if people really want a diversity of thought, wouldn't they just do it even if it's called DEI? And I mean, is the terminology going to help? It might. I mean, and honestly, it could, but I guess I'm a skeptic that I feel like if people really wanted to do something different and they really wanted to be inclusive, they would actively seek it. But I do like the idea of diversity of thought if it's hard for people to get to grasp DEI.
Yeah.
On that point, I might say, what is the diversity of thoughts about equity? I've just provided something. So if you have a different point of view and add to the diversity of what equity means, that's fair game. You have to start off with a starting point and then either construct it or deconstruct it in a way that might be more meaningful for different people. So I think defining what equity is incredibly important. But what is also very difficult to do is to co-negotiate and co-construct what the meaning of fairness is. And that is contentious. How do you decide what's fair? Who decides? Who's involved in the discussion?
I'm deciding.
Oh, yeah. Good for you. But you know what I'm getting at is how do you create? I mean, it gets to me in the whole issue of even if you try and co-construct it, dovetailing on what Dream was talking about in terms of diversity of thought, there's all sorts of dynamics that goes on in groups, the inside-outside dynamics. What are the subtle biases that marginalize some people and elevate others? And that happens all the time in groups. But do you even have a language to call out the inside-outside dynamics of groups and who gets marginalized and who gets elevated? And to me, that speaks to some of the challenges of dealing with this field, is that I don't think we're that sophisticated in articulating some of these dynamics, which would allow greater diversity of thought, or whatever frame you want to use. Anybody else would like to chime in? There's a number of people who aren't on cameras, and if you want to unmic, you can just chime in without having to put your hand up if you don't have your camera on. So we need more diversity of thought here. You don't want to hear me rattle on. Anybody else like to chime in on this issue?
I'll just throw out some comments. I'm 57 years old, and I've been a CFO my entire career. And there was always issues of fighting racism and dealing with biases throughout my career. And but because I was well educated, I went to Berkeley in Michigan, I was able to get decent positions and navigate having to rebuild an organization because over my career, I ran finance departments at the airport in San Francisco, at the state treasurer's office, at the county of San Diego, before coming to the water authority and leading a department, usually as the first African-American executive. It was hard for staff to even visualize working for a Black woman. And a lot of times folks had to decide to stay or leave. And half the time they did leave. And then I ended up having to rebuild the organization. But it was really hard. And I have really good friends that are now general managers of water agencies. And they were like, well, why don't you consider being a general manager? I said, hell, I can't even barely run a department. I couldn't imagine working for an entire water agency as the general manager as a Black woman and having to rebuild an entire, it's just certain burdens that we have to endure. And how do we manage and navigate that? And, you just have to have really tough skin. And my daughter, she's actually working on her PhD in computer science, working on biases. And she's at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And she had to fight her way through getting rid of her advisor. And, most professors are tenured, very powerful people. And she almost dropped out because she couldn't figure out how to get away from this racist woman. And she's the one that's going to sign off on all her stuff. And she would just torment the child, where she would call me and cry. But thank God, because of her research, it got picked up where she got to present in Seoul, Korea, that gave her power to demand a new advisor. And she got the attention of the president, and they believed her, or they didn't want her to leave because of her notoriety. But I just say all this is that it's just a tough road. My daughter, she'll come crying. I'm like, well, you're a Black woman in America. You got to deal with it. So, I don't know how to console her. Just have to tell her that, get some therapy, be around folks that you can re-energize yourself. Don't let this woman, even though she's not working for her, she still has to interact with her. She's traumatized by that. She'll call and cry me. I got to see her today. I'm like, oh my God. But just two stories between me and my daughter. But I think the good thing is we have to continue to have these conversations and fight the good fight and just continue to make a better world for tomorrow.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Lisa. Your
sharing that.
daughter has an open door. We'd love her to present at Witty too, any of that stuff. Because that sounds great. We'd love to support her.
That'd be great.
Actually, what I was going to suggest, the last time we had a session, I had the good fortune of meeting Catherine to come and share his story. It sounds like there are two stories there. There's a mother-daughter relationship, but if you're interested, we're doing a little sprint between now and the next session, and I'm looking for people who are willing to share their stories. So if you're open and your daughter's open and you're available on any of the next 4 Wednesdays, it'd be a delight for you to come back and help us understand the challenges that you're continuing to face. So no obligation. If you're willing, that's fine. If not, that's okay too. But I just wanted to open that up.
Sure, just give me a call. Let's talk offline. I don't know about my daughter, but I'll see.
Well, tell her I'll have a chat with her, and if she's okay, I'm quite happy to have a chat with her as well. Maybe the mother needs to lead the way, and then she can see whether she wants to follow in her mother's footsteps or not.
Will do.
Oh, okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reminded of something as I was hearing you, Lisa, and thank you for sharing. This is a very different conversation depending on the contexts. And when you're having it with a founder or founders and an executive boardroom that's already quite aligned, it's very different from going into a big corporation that has existed, that has been around for quite some time and has had a certain mindset and way of doing things. It's way more challenging in those environments. They're just going to do what they need to do often to check off some boxes, but it's not really with the right intention and done consciously. Whereas when I'm engaging in this kind of work with founders, it's way easier because the values emerge from the founder's lived experience. And if they already believe in the importance of diversity of thought, diversity of people, then it's much easier to enact different policies that help the organization where people are better off. In large corporations, though, I mean, it is, yeah, it's a fun bureaucracy to deal with. And sometimes you don't know if you're really having an honest conversation with the person in good faith, or they're just saying what they need to say to get along.
Yeah, and I liked Catherine's comment in the chat about diversity of thought. Catherine, I don't know if you want to expand on it, but I feel like it goes with what you're just saying.
Was that for me?
Oh, sorry, there are a lot of Catherines.
Oh, there we go. There's Catherine. I was going to say,
oh, you did.
Sorry about that.
Kathleen. No, it's okay.
Catherine, okay, yeah, if you'd like to speak, you are muted, so unmute if you'd like. And if not, we can. Yeah, I'm happy to read it too, Catherine with a C, if that's good. Maybe you could respond. So, if someone is using the concept of diversity of thought to justify or downplay existing racial biases or discriminatory practices, it implies that these biases are still present despite attempts to appear more inclusive. Great point.
I mean, yeah, a very good way of saying what I was trying to say. A lot more eloquent, but yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And that's why it's so hard to work in social impact with for-profit, large, established organizations, because you never know if they're being honest or not. And their priorities change like so suddenly based on the economy or just what's happening internally. So what your efforts around diversity of thought can go away so quickly because they're not truly part of, their foundation and their vision for the company.
Right, but I think that's why you have to roll it up under engineering and revenue and product rather than it being some type of social cause, because it really needs to be about the bottom line. And I think that's where you can potentially get alignment, right? Because I think, right, what Catherine say, right, yeah, I mean, I agree. It's been kind of failed programs because it is just driven through fear and checking boxes and trying to look good when something happens. But I think we can certainly show the value, right? I mean, does everyone remember like they had pink phones where they were trying to market to women, probably mid 2000s, I think, and everything was pink. And then it's like, that's not what you should ask them, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of telling us what we should want instead of asking us.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd just like to maybe build on Kathleen's comment and tie it into Lisa's contribution. And the reason why my heart went out to your daughter's experience. I have a niece staying with me I won't go into the details, but there are issues that she's struggling with. And the question is, how do you develop sort of intergenerational relationships that enable the younger generation to be able to navigate these tumultuous waters so that they can navigate it well? And I don't know, Catherine, if you have any experience from your own, navigating through these waters that might be helpful for, how can we create a space where people can come and share that, but also enable people to be able to be more effective in dealing with these, dealing with the biases that they're experiencing in the workforce?
Yeah, start your own company. I mean, I never experienced the welcome openness of being able to say when I felt someone was being racist toward me, or I felt judged because I was a woman or anything like that throughout my career until I got on my own. And still, I still have to get business and all that kind of stuff. And I still can't change, who I am or what I look like. So it will always be there, but I am much more confident in what I'm doing. It's unfortunately, like Lisa was saying, just something that we have to go through and deal with every day. And most of the time we're in it alone. So I'm definitely open to if there are solutions where people have someone to talk to and it'll actually make a real impact and won't hurt their careers at certain jobs.
To me, that speaks to the mentoring process of how to build mentoring systems in place. So, David, I'd be curious to know whether you're aware or anybody else here about mentoring systems that deal with these thorny issues, so that people don't feel isolated and alone, because that makes it even worse.
I mean, a lot of times you don't see people in those positions who look like you or have gone through those same experiences. So it makes it, who do you talk to? I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, outside of the organization,
Okay.
it's not just, I mean, how do you create places where, where people are struggling, particularly marginalized groups, where they're not part of the mainstream? They may not get the support, the sort of support that's really needed to help them. I mean, judging from Lisa, she's lived through that. And she's, if she's still here, I can't see if she's still here, but, she's a survivor. I mean, she's a survivor and very resilient. So what can we learn from Lisa's story that might help, other women who are struggling with these issues?
Yeah, and I think just the pain points for the companies. One of our members who was had joined one of our events, amazing Black woman. She went to VM. I said, why were you only at VMware for 8 months or something? And they had something where a woman had to be interviewed for every position. And this woman had like 20 years, amazing experience selling enterprise deals with just a great background. And she was just like, she just couldn't get respect because she kept being looked at as like a diversity hire or something. Meanwhile, she had more experience than anybody on the team. And then she just said, I'm done, and left. So I think when these companies make these reactions, just aren't doing it the right way and authentically, that's where they're just alienating everybody. And then the stockholder, they miss out on having this amazing person working for them. And how many times is that going to happen before they finally wake up?
Dave, I think we should begin to wrap up and maybe hear from people what are they taking away from this conversation, and how equity is continuous work in progress. It needs that attention and diligence to it. But any take-home messages from the conversation that we've had here today, and as I say, we're going to have a sprint weekly until the next monthly session. And if anybody here is interested in sharing their stories, we can spotlight different people during these weekly sessions and hear from their perspective. So, anybody?
I'd like to add just this briefly, and I don't mean to instigate or get inappropriate or political, but it's unavoidable and it's important to talk about. After desegregation, many places with many public swimming pools preferred to drain the swimming pools and shut them down, rather than allow the public swimming pools paid for by taxpayer money, all American citizens of all backgrounds, rather than those pools existing and continuing. The swimming pools were shut down. The water was drained, done. Meaning no one got to swim in them. And so sometimes with DEI, in my humble opinion, I feel like the application of it was kind of, in some ways, in some contexts, rigged to fail and attacked, so that DEI as an acronym can be looked at in a way where it was more questionable, when in fact, the very idea and the very basis behind it was actually necessary and continues to be. And so whether we call it DEI still moving forward or not, the main impulse behind it is not going to change. And I wish we lived in a place where we could look at this as investing in citizens, so we can practice better citizenship, because we're all better off because of it. If we looked at it that way, that companies not only benefit, society benefits when we invest in skills and give more opportunity, and people show up included. And yeah, with meritocracy as well, and with performance and KPIs, just like anybody. We need to be able to look at it more holistically, given the history where we're at and the upcoming election and the usage of language, and whether using the acronym opens opportunity or just gets us bogged down in more back and forth. So human potential, diversity of thought, whatever language we're going to use, the idea, the ethos still remains the same. And so I find the ethos to be the more important thing, and not necessarily what we call, what we're doing by a certain name.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think from the beginning, DEI kind of excluded white people, essentially, especially white men. In a DEI training, I mean, almost the point was to make them feel uncomfortable and that they were horrible people. And it's like, that doesn't help us, in general. Like, we all need to be able to work together when it comes to whatever DEI means, whatever you want to call it. And so it's like, where can we start from where everyone feels like they can support each other regardless of race or color, gender, background, disability. So yeah, that's another way from the start. It kind of was a failure as well. And I completely agree.
Anyone else? Last closing comment, any take-home messages or thoughts or future directions?
I just want to thank everybody for being here. We do have the Witty member orientation starting in a second. So I'm going to put that link in the chat if anybody wants to find out more about what we do at Witty. And Catherine, thank you so much for sharing. I'll connect with you to set up a call to see how we can finally, make progress. I think it took a pandemic for a lot of these things to change. And now with people being able to work hybrid and other things, we can hopefully transform the whole conversation. So.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.